Become who you are. This maxim from Pindar, adopted by Nietzsche as one of his fundamental principles, echoes through the centuries as a call to authenticity and self-creation. Welcome to this philosophical journey where we will explore one of Friedrich Nietzsche's most profound insights, the connection between personal values and a truly fulfilled life. In a world that increasingly emphasizes external validation, material success, and conformity to social expectations, Nietzsche invites us to reconsider the importance of creating our own values. For him, the ability to establish personal values, rather than simply inheriting them from tradition, religion, or society, represents the highest expression of human potential. Today, we will navigate through the works and thoughts of this 19th century German philosopher who, during his relatively short productive life, conceived some of the most influential and transformative ideas in modern philosophy. We will see how his reflections on the free spirit, the will to power, Wille zur Macht, the revaluation of all values, and the death of God are intimately connected to the development of personal values that lead to authentic fulfillment. From The Birth of Tragedy to Ecce Homo, we will investigate how the creation of personal values permeates Nietzsche's work, not just as a theme, but as an essential philosophical method. We will also explore how his own life, marked by illness, academic rejection, and misunderstanding, became a living laboratory for his theories on value creation and fulfillment. Whether you are a scholar of Nietzsche or someone seeking to understand better the relationship between personal values and a meaningful existence, I invite you to examine this fundamental question. Why is the creation of personal values not just a philosophical exercise, but the very path to a genuinely fulfilled life? Nietzsche developed one of the most incisive critiques of the value systems of his era, a critique that remains surprisingly relevant today. In works such as Beyond Good and Evil and On the Genealogy of Morality, he describes how modern society tends to present inherited values as universal, eternal truths, suppressing the individual's capacity to question and create new values. God is dead, Nietzsche famously proclaimed in The Gay Science. This statement, far from being merely provocative, announced a profound cultural diagnosis. The traditional foundations of Western values, primarily Christianity, had lost their legitimacy and power in the modern world. This collapse of metaphysical certainty created both a crisis and an opportunity. The tremendous event is still on its way, still traveling. It has not yet reached the ears of men. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves. This passage illustrates the magnitude of the crisis. Humanity has undermined its own value foundation, but has not yet fully confronted the implications of this action. For Nietzsche, the dominant systems of morality, which he provocatively called slave morality, did not arise from deep reflection or an affirmative will to power, but from resentment and fear of those unable to create their own values. On the Genealogy of Morality, Nietzsche excavates the psychological origins of conventional morality. He argues that Judeo-Christian values, which glorify humility, compassion, and self-denial, emerged historically as an expression of resentment of the weak against the strong. What we call goodness is often merely the socially acceptable mask of impotence. The first step toward a fulfilled life, therefore, is the recognition that inherited values are not necessarily the highest or truest. They are frequently control mechanisms and homogenization that aim to create predictable and governable individuals, what Nietzsche calls in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the great dragon named Thou Shalt. Nietzsche identifies several manifestations of this value crisis in his era. Growing nationalism, which subordinates the individual to the nation-state too. Democratic egalitarianism, which levels qualitative differences in the name of quantitative equality. Institutional Christianity, which standardizes religious experience. Utilitarian morality, which reduces ethics to the mathematics of the greatest happiness for the greatest number. 5. Scientific positivism, which replaces value creation with mere fact accumulation. The collapse of traditional value systems opens space for a radical re-evaluation of human values, but also imposes an overwhelming responsibility. Without transcendent or universal values, it falls to the individual to create their own values. And here begins the necessity of personal value creation. For Nietzsche, the process of overcoming inherited values and creating new ones requires a fundamental shift in how we understand ourselves. In a world without metaphysical guarantees, we are neither predetermined creatures acting out a divine plan, nor merely biological machines responding to stimuli. Instead, we are beings capable of self-creation through the values we establish. In Davon, Human All Too Human, his first work after breaking with the influence of Wagner and Schopenhauer, Nietzsche writes, "One thing is needful, to give style to one's character, a great and rare art. It is practiced by those who survey all the strengths and weaknesses of their nature and then fit them into an artistic plan until every one of them appears as art and reason, and even weaknesses delight the eye." This aestheticization of existence, treating one's life as a work of art rather than the fulfillment of pre-existing moral prescriptions, represents the core of Nietzschean value creation. Our values are not discovered in some transcendent realm or deduced from universal principles. They are created through our choices and commitments. This self-creation manifests in several interconnected ways. First, it requires rigorous self-knowledge. As Nietzsche observes in The Gay Science, we, however, want to become those we are. Human beings who are new, unique, incomparable, who give themselves laws, who create themselves. But this creation isn't arbitrary or capricious. It begins with an honest assessment of one's nature, inclinations and potentials. In his autobiographical work, Ecce Homo, Nietzsche demonstrates this self-knowledge when he examines his own intellectual development with unsparing honesty, acknowledging both his strengths and limitations. The subtitle of this work, How One Becomes What One Is, encapsulates the paradox of Nietzschean self-creation. We don't invent ourselves ex nihilo, but rather cultivate and stylize the raw material of our nature. Second, value creation involves the courage to break with convention. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche describes three metamorphoses of the spirit: the camel, which dutifully carries the weight of tradition; the lion, which fights to create freedom from tradition; and the child, which represents a new beginning, and the creation of new values. The spirit now wills his own will, and he who had been lost to the world now conquers his own world. This breaking with convention isn't rebellion for its own sake, but rather the necessary clearing of space for authentic value creation. It requires what Nietzsche calls the great health, a resilience that can withstand the vertigo of freedom and the absence of external validation. Third, personal value creation demands a rejection of universal moral systems. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche argues that there are no moral phenomena at all, but only a moral interpretation of phenomena. This perspectivism, the view that there are no objective facts, only interpretations, extends to values themselves. Rather than seeking universal moral principles that would apply to all people in all situations, Nietzsche advocates for a plurality of value systems based on different types of people and different life conditions. What leads to fulfillment for one person may lead to misery for another. What represents flourishing for a philosopher may represent decline for an artist. This rejection of moral universalism doesn't mean that anything goes in Nietzsche's philosophy. Instead, it means that values must be judged by how well they serve life, specifically whether they enhance or diminish the power, creativity, and flourishing of those who hold them. At the heart of Nietzsche's understanding of personal values lies his concept of the will to power, Wille zur Macht. Often misinterpreted as mere domination over others, the will to power in Nietzsche's philosophy represents something much more profound, the fundamental drive towards self-overcoming and creative expression. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche declares, "Where I found a living creature, there I found will to power, and even in the will of the servant, I found the will to be master." This observation isn't merely psychological but ontological. The will to power is not just one human drive among many, but the essential character of life itself. For Nietzsche, All living beings seek not merely to preserve themselves, but to expand, grow, and overcome resistance. In humans, this drive manifests most nobly not as control over others, but as self-mastery and creative value generation. The strongest and most evil spirits have so far advanced humanity the most. They have always rekindled the drowsing passions. All ordered society puts the passions to sleep. They have always reawakened the sense of comparison, of contradiction, of delight in the new, the daring, and the untried. They force men to meet opinion with opinion, model with model. This passage from the Gay Science illustrates how the will to power, expressed through value creation, drives human development. By challenging established values and creating new ones, strong spirits force humanity to evolve beyond comfortable stagnation. The will to power manifests in value creation in several ways. First, as the imposition of form on chaos. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche writes, "The noble type of man experiences itself as determining values. It does not need approval. It judges, what is harmful to me is harmful in itself. It knows itself to be that which first accords honor to things. It is value-creating. This creation isn't arbitrary, but rather the expression of a particular life perspective, a way of organizing and interpreting experience that enhances rather than diminishes vitality. Just as an artist imposes form on raw materials to create something beautiful, the value creator imposes meaningful form on the chaos of existence." Second, as perpetual self-overcoming. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche declares, "And life itself told me this secret. Behold, it said, I am that which must always overcome itself." Personal values are never final or absolute, but always subject to revision and transcendence. The or fulfilled life, in Nietzsche's vision, isn't one that reaches a state of perfect contentment or static virtue, but one engaged in continual growth and self-overcoming. Each set of values creates the conditions for its own transcendence as the individual develops new capacities and confronts new challenges. Third, as the transformation of obstacles into opportunities. In Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche formulates his famous dictum, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." The will to power doesn't avoid resistance, but actively seeks it out as a stimulus for growth. This attitude toward resistance represents a fundamental value reversal. What conventional morality might view as bad, struggle, conflict, suffering, becomes good when reinterpreted as an opportunity for self-overcoming. The highest expression of the will to power isn't the avoidance of difficulty, but the capacity to transform difficulty into creative achievement. One of Nietzsche's most controversial insights is that not all values are created equal. In contrast to democratic egalitarianism, which tends to treat all perspectives and preferences as equally valid, Nietzsche insists on the necessity of value hierarchies, both within individuals and societies. In Beyond Good and Evil, he writes, "Every elevation of the type man has hitherto been the work of an aristocratic society, and so it will always be, a society which believes in a long scale of gradations of rank and differences of worth between man and man. This aristocracy that Nietzsche envisions isn't based on inherited privileges or wealth, but on the capacity for value creation. The truly noble individual isn't defined by social status, but by the ability to establish meaningful hierarchies of value that enhance rather than diminish life." For Nietzsche, a fulfilled life requires not just having personal values, but organizing those values into coherent hierarchies that direct one's energies toward the highest possibilities. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he observes, "Many lands saw Zarathustra and many peoples. Thus he discovered the good and bad of many peoples. No greater power did Zarathustra find on earth than good and bad." This passage highlights how different cultures create different value systems, different determinations of good and bad, but also suggests that these cultural values can be evaluated based on how they affect human flourishing and greatness. The hierarchy of values operates on several levels. First, within the individual psyche. In Daybreak, Nietzsche suggests that mental health involves establishing a proper order among one's drives and impulses. The higher nature in man manifests itself when one is able to master the multiplicity of drives within. Rather than repressing or denying certain aspects of human nature, as conventional morality often demands, Nietzsche advocates for establishing a rank order among drives, sublimating and redirecting them toward creative purposes. The fulfilled life isn't one devoid of lower impulses, but one where those impulses are integrated into a harmonious whole under the direction of a dominant value. Second, between different types of values. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche distinguishes between life-affirming and life-denying values, those that enhance vitality, creativity, and growth versus those that promote decline, weakness, and stagnation. This distinction doesn't map neatly onto conventional categories of good and evil. Traditional virtues like humility, selflessness, and pity can be life-denying when they prevent necessary hardness, healthy selfishness, or creative destruction. Conversely, qualities traditionally considered vices, pride, desire for distinction, even cruelty toward oneself, can be life-affirming when they promote growth and excellence. Third, between different possibilities of human existence. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche presents his concept of the Übermensch, often translated as Overman or Superman, not as a biological evolution, but as a cultural and spiritual ideal, the human being who has overcome both external, moral authority and internal chaos to become a self-legislating creator of values. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? This passage challenges readers to evaluate their lives not by how well they conform to existing standards, but by how they contribute to human enhancement, both within themselves and potentially for the species. The fulfilled life, in this view, is one that serves as a bridge to higher possibilities of human existence. Perhaps Nietzsche's most profound test for the validity of personal values is his thought experiment of eternal return or eternal recurrence. First introduced in The Gay Science and further developed in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, this concept asks, what if every moment of your life were to repeat infinitely, exactly as it has occurred? What if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, this life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, you are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine? This thought experiment functions as the ultimate criterion for evaluating personal values. Only if one can joyfully affirm the eternal repetition of one's life, including all its suffering and disappointment, has one truly created values that lead to fulfillment. The eternal return operates on several levels in Nietzsche's philosophy. First, as a psychological test of affirmation, in Ecce Homo, Nietzsche describes his concept of amor fati, love of fate. My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity, not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it, but love it. This complete affirmation represents the highest potential of value creation, the ability to transform even suffering into something meaningful and worthy of celebration. The fulfilled life isn't one devoid of pain, but one where pain itself is incorporated into a larger affirmative vision. Second, as a criterion for evaluating actions. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche suggests that we should live as if each moment would return eternally, to redeem what is past and to transform every it was into thus would I have it. That only do I call redemption. This perspective transforms how we approach daily choices. Trivial decisions, guided merely by convenience or social expectation, become unbearable when imagined as recurring eternally. Only actions that express our deepest values, that we would willingly repeat forever, pass the test of eternal return. Third, as a counterbalance to nihilism, After the death of God, many of Nietzsche's contemporaries feared that life would lose all meaning. If there is no divine order or transcendent purpose, why shouldn't we fall into despair or hedonistic indulgence? The eternal return provides an immanent rather than transcendent source of meaning. Instead of deriving value from conformity to eternal standards beyond this world, we create value through affirming this world itself, with all its joy and suffering, in an act of existential courage. In The Will to Power, Nietzsche describes this affirmation as the highest possible formula of affirmation, a yes saying to life so complete that it transfigures even the most difficult aspects of existence into something worthy of desire. Nietzsche wasn't content with abstract philosophical speculation about values. Throughout his works, he points to historical figures who exemplify different approaches to value creation and fulfillment. These exemplars offer concrete illustrations of how personal values can be embodied in lived experience. In Untimely Meditations, Nietzsche presents Schopenhauer as a model of intellectual integrity, someone willing to follow his insights wherever they led, even when they contradicted established academic orthodoxy. Despite his later break with Schopenhauer's pessimistic philosophy, Nietzsche continued to admire this independence of mind. What he taught is forgotten. What he lived remains. Look at him. He was independent. This passage highlights how the creation of personal values isn't primarily about articulating new moral principles, but about embodying a distinctive way of being in the world. Schopenhauer's value wasn't in his doctrine, but in his example of philosophical courage. Similarly, Nietzsche presents Goethe as an exemplar of life affirmation and cultural synthesis. In Twilight of the Idols, he describes Goethe as not a German event, but a European one, a magnificent attempt to overcome the 18th century by a return to nature, by an ascent to the naturalness of the Renaissance, a kind of self-overcoming on the part of that century. What Nietzsche admired in Goethe wasn't a specific set of beliefs, but a comprehensive attitude toward life, one that embraced rather than denied the full range of human experience, that sought to integrate rather than fragment the self, and that created rather than merely criticized. Even figures with whom Nietzsche had profound disagreements could serve as exemplars of particular virtues. In Human, All Too Human, he acknowledges Socrates' intellectual courage even while criticizing the Socratic elevation of reason over instinct. In The Antichrist, he recognizes Jesus, as distinct from institutional Christianity, as a practitioner of a unique form of love, even while rejecting the otherworldliness of Christian theology. These examples reveal several principles about personal values in practice. First, that values are more effectively communicated through embodiment than prescription. Throughout his works, Nietzsche criticizes moralists who preach virtue without exemplifying it. The fulfilled life doesn't consist in knowing or advocating the right values, but in living them concretely. Second, that genuine value creation is historically situated. Each of Nietzsche's exemplars responded to the specific challenges and possibilities of their time and culture. Rather than seeking timeless moral truths, they created values appropriate to their historical context, while often anticipating future developments. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche describes such creators as commanders and lawgivers who say, "This shall be." Their values aren't arbitrary personal preferences, but creative responses to the needs of their era, responses that can shape cultural development for generations. Third, that fulfillment comes through wholeness rather than moral perfection. Nietzsche's exemplars aren't saints or moral paragons in the conventional sense. What distinguishes them is their capacity to integrate diverse and even contradictory aspects of human experience into harmonious wholes. In Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche describes this integration. One is necessary, one is a piece of fate, one belongs to the whole, one is in the whole. There is nothing which could judge, measure, compare, or condemn our being, for that would mean judging, measuring, comparing, or condemning the whole, but there is nothing besides the whole. This holistic perspective contrasts sharply with conventional morality's tendency to divide human nature into higher and lower elements, celebrating the former while condemning the latter. The fulfilled life in Nietzsche's vision comes not from suppressing aspects of ourselves, but from organizing them into creative unity. Nietzsche recognized that the collapse of traditional value systems posed not just an opportunity for personal value creation, but also a profound danger: nihilism. In The Will to Power, he defines nihilism as the state where the highest values devaluate themselves. The aim is lacking. Why finds no answer. This nihilistic crisis manifests in several forms in modern life: passive nihilism, the exhausted resignation that nothing matters, leading to apathy and quiet despair; active nihilism, the violent rejection of all values, leading to destruction. For its own sake, last man nihilism, the comfortable contentment with trivial pleasures, avoiding both great suffering and great joy. Nietzsche saw these responses as inadequate reactions to the death of God, ways of avoiding rather than embracing the responsibility of value creation. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he depicts the last man who claims, "We have invented happiness," and merely seeks comfort, security, and mild entertainment. Against these nihilistic tendencies, Nietzsche proposes personal value creation as the only viable path forward. But how does one create values in a world where all foundations have been undermined? How does one avoid the trap of mere arbitrary preference or the endless deconstruction of all standards? Nietzsche offers several strategies. First, reconnection with bodily wisdom. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche declares, "Behind your thoughts and feelings, my brother, stands a mighty commander, an unknown sage. He is called Self. He lives in your body. He is your body." This emphasis on embodiment provides a counterbalance to the excessive abstraction of traditional philosophy. Values aren't created ex nihilo through pure reason, but emerge from our embodied experience in the world, our instincts, drives, sufferings, and joys. The body provides a starting point for value creation that avoids both metaphysical dogmatism and complete relativism. Second, cultural experimentation. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche envisions the great health that one does not merely have but also acquires continually, and must acquire because one gives it up again and again and must give it up. This dynamic health involves the capacity to adopt different perspectives and experiment with different value systems, not as a form of ironic detachment or relativism, but as a process of testing and refining one's own values through contrast and comparison. Nietzsche himself practiced this experimentation, exploring diverse intellectual traditions from Greek tragedy to Buddhism, from the Renaissance to modern science. This breadth allowed him to overcome provincial limitations and create values informed by multiple cultural perspectives. Third, artistic creation as a model for value creation. In The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche presents art as humanity's greatest means of making existence bearable and meaningful. It is only as an aesthetic phenomenon that existence and the world are eternally justified. Art provides a model for value creation because it transforms even suffering into something meaningful and beautiful. Just as the tragic artists of ancient Greece created powerful artistic expressions from the most terrible aspects of existence, the value creator transforms life's challenges into opportunities for growth and significance. This aesthetic justification doesn't mean treating life as mere illusion or entertainment. Rather, it means approaching existence with the same seriousness and creativity that an artist brings to their work, imposing form on chaos, creating meaning rather than merely discovering it, and evaluating success by the vitality and power of what emerges. If Nietzsche found the creation of personal values challenging in the late 19th century, what would he say about our contemporary situation? The 21st century presents both new obstacles and new possibilities for those seeking a fulfilled life. Through authentic value creation, modern life intensifies several trends that Nietzsche identified. The acceleration of life reduces opportunities for deep reflection. In Daybreak, Nietzsche observed that we all suffer from a haste which makes us superficial. Today's digital environment, with its constant notifications and information overload, further diminishes the mental space needed for value creation. Consumer Capitalism commodifies even rebellion and nonconformity. What Nietzsche called the spirit of gravity, the pressure toward conformity and mediocrity, now operates not primarily through religious or state authority, but through market mechanisms that transform even countercultural values into marketable lifestyles. Hyperspecialization fragments experience and knowledge. Nietzsche criticized the academic specialization of his era for producing narrow experts rather than comprehensive human beings. Today's economic and educational systems push this specialization to even greater extremes, making it difficult to develop the holistic perspective needed for meaningful value creation. Despite these challenges, our era also offers unique resources for those seeking to create personal values. Unprecedented access to diverse knowledge traditions. While Nietzsche had to struggle to access non-Western philosophical perspectives, today's seeker can explore global wisdom traditions with relative ease, providing rich material for value creation beyond provincial limitations. Increased social mobility and flexibility. The weakening of traditional social structures, while creating its own challenges, also reduces barriers to unconventional life choices. There are more opportunities to experiment with different ways of living than in Nietzsche's more rigid society. New forms of community beyond geographical constraints. While Nietzsche often experienced painful isolation, today's value creators can more easily find like-minded individuals, even if they are rare in their immediate environment, creating what Nietzsche might call spiritual aristocracies across physical boundaries. How might one apply Nietzschean insights to create personal values in this contemporary context? Several practices suggest themselves. First, cultivating strategic solitude. In Human All Too Human, Nietzsche writes, "The thinker needs no applause and no audience, not even a lonely walk among cliffs or a cave in the mountains by the sea." Creating regular spaces of disconnection from digital distraction allows the mental freedom needed for authentic value formation. Second, practicing physiological self-awareness. Nietzsche anticipated contemporary findings about embodied cognition when he insisted that our thinking emerges from our bodily condition. Paying attention to how different environments, activities, and substances affect our mood, energy, and thought patterns provides crucial data for developing values aligned with our actual nature rather than abstract ideals. Third, engaging in genealogical questioning. Nietzsche's genealogy of morals examined how our inherited values emerged from specific historical conditions rather than universal truths. Applying this method to our own values helps distinguish between authentic personal commitments and unexamined social conditioning. Questions like, who benefits from my holding this value? And what kind of person would create such a value? Allow us to trace values to their origins. Whether in our own experience or in historical power dynamics, we may want to perpetuate or resist. Fourth, embracing productive tension between creation and community. While Nietzsche emphasized the solitary aspects of value creation, he also recognized the need for communication and influence. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the protagonist repeatedly returns from his mountain solitude to share his insights, even when met with incomprehension. This tension between independent creation and social engagement remains essential. The fulfilled life involves neither complete conformity to community standards nor complete isolation, but rather a dynamic interplay between personal authenticity and meaningful contribution. Throughout this journey through Nietzschean philosophy, we've explored the profound connection between personal values and a fulfilled life. We have seen how the creation of authentic values, far from being merely a theoretical exercise, constitutes the essential task of human existence in a world without transcendent guarantees. The death of God that Nietzsche diagnosed represents both a crisis and an opportunity. With the collapse of traditional value systems, we face the vertigo of freedom, the responsibility to create meaning rather than merely discover it. This responsibility is simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating, the source of both modern nihilism and unprecedented possibilities for human flourishing. As Zarathustra proclaims, I love him who lives in order to know and seeks to know in order that the overman may hereafter live. Thus he seeks his own downfall. This paradoxical statement captures the Nietzschean vision of fulfillment, not the achievement of contentment or security, but the continuous process of self-overcoming through which we transcend our current limitations and create values worthy of affirmation. We have explored how the will to power, properly understood, manifests not as domination over others, but as creative self-mastery and value generation. We have examined how the thought experiment of eternal return provides a criterion for evaluating our choices. Would we willingly live the same life infinitely, with all its suffering and disappointment? Through historical exemplars like Goethe and Schopenhauer, we have seen how personal values can be embodied in concrete lives, not as abstract principles, but as distinctive ways of being in the world. We have confronted the challenge of nihilism and considered how art, bodily wisdom, and cultural experimentation offer resources for meaningful value creation. Finally, we have considered how Nietzsche's insights might apply to contemporary life, with its unique challenges and opportunities for those seeking authenticity and fulfillment. The path to a fulfilled life, in Nietzsche's vision, is neither easy nor comfortable. It requires courage to question inherited values, honesty to confront our own nature, creativity to generate new meanings, and strength to bear the weight of responsibility. As he writes in The Gay Science, "The secret for harvesting from existence, the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously. Few dangers are more profound, more transformative, and more necessary for true fulfillment than the risk of creating personal values that express our highest possibilities, values worthy of eternal return, values that transform even suffering into something meaningful and beautiful." The invitation remains open to move beyond both dogmatic certainty and nihilistic despair toward the creative affirmation that Nietzsche called the greatest weight, the recognition that this life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and the capacity to greet this prospect not with dread, but with the joyful cry, da capo, once more and once more. This affirmation isn't blind optimism or stoic resignation, but the capacity to love life precisely in its concrete particularity, with all its pain and disappointment. Such love represents not the abandonment of values, but their highest expression, the transformation of existence itself into something worthy of unconditional affirmation. As we navigate our complex modern world, with its countless distractions and prepackaged identities, Nietzsche's challenge remains urgently relevant: to create values that reflect not merely social convention or fleeting desire, but our deepest potential for greatness and authenticity. For in this creation lies the path to a truly fulfilled life, a life that expresses not what we are expected to be, but what we are.